March 14, 2026, 4:17 local time. Strait of Hormuz. 9 commercial vessels are converging on Bandar Abbas. Standard container traffic. Standard routes, standard schedules. None of them will reach port. Because somewhere in the dark waters between Oman and Iran, the United States Navy has just activated something that hasn't been seen in this region since 1988. A full naval blockade. I'm your host at Battlefront Signal, where we break down the most critical naval operations shaping global power. Today, we're reconstructing the 48 hours that nearly ignited a shooting war in the Persian Gulf. The boarding operations, the submarine hunt, and the moment CENTCOM realized Iran's real countermove wasn't in the strait at all. To understand why the U.S. Navy sealed off Iranian ports in March 2026, you have to go back 5 weeks. February 7th, 2026. National Security Council, Washington, D.C. CIA Director Sarah Kensington presents satellite imagery to the president. The photos show something specific: 16 TL launchers, transporter erector launchers, repositioned around Parchin military complex southeast of Tehran. These aren't defensive systems. They're Shahab 3 medium-range ballistic missiles. Range: 1,300 kilometers. Payload: 750 kilograms. Enough to reach every U.S. base in the Gulf region. But the missiles aren't the problem. The problem is what's underneath them. Ground-penetrating radar analysis from 3 separate passes by an RQ-170 Sentinel drone shows underground construction activity at Parchin that matches the profile of centrifuge installation. Iran isn't just rebuilding what was destroyed in the summer strikes of 2025. It's accelerating. By February 20th, intelligence assessments from the DIA, CIA, and NSA converge on a single conclusion. Iran is 60 to 90 days from enriching uranium to 90%. Weapons-grade purity. The enrichment is happening at a facility the U.S. didn't know existed until January. A tunnel complex carved into the mountains near Saghand, in Yazd province. The president convenes a war cabinet on February 22nd. Options on the table range from surgical strikes to diplomatic pressure. Secretary of Defense recommends a middle path: a naval blockade that would strangle Iran's ability to import the specialized components needed for centrifuge assembly. Carbon fiber rotors, miraging steel, frequency converters, all of it arriving by sea through Bandar Abbas. On March 1st, 2026, the president signs a classified executive order authorizing Operation Iron Curtain, the first naval blockade of a sovereign nation's ports by the United States since the Cuban Missile Crisis. 13 days to prepare. 13 days to position an entire strike group without Iran noticing. They noticed anyway. CENTCOM's operational security held for exactly 9 days. On March 10th, Iranian intelligence, likely tipped off by commercial shipping companies rerouting around the Gulf, sent a flash message to IRGC Navy headquarters in Bandar Abbas. The Americans were coming. Iran had 4 days to prepare its response. 4 days to position assets. 4 days to plan a countermove that would catch the U.S. Navy completely off guard. The blockade force assembled under the command of Rear Admiral James Whitfield, aboard the Ticonderoga-class cruiser, USS Leyte Gulf. The force was substantial. The guided missile destroyers USS Kearney and USS Laboon, both Arleigh Burke-class. The amphibious assault ship USS Baton, carrying a Marine Expeditionary Unit and, critically, a helicopter squadron equipped for anti-submarine warfare. 2 Coast Guard cutters, USCGC Hamilton and USCGC James, specifically trained in maritime interdiction. And lurking beneath the surface, a Virginia-class attack submarine whose name remains classified. Total personnel, approximately 4,200. Total cruise missiles available, over 200. Air assets, 12 helicopters, 6 Harrier jump jets, and 4 MQ-8C Fire Scout drones. The blockade perimeter was established on March 13th at 2200 Zulu time. It formed a 140 nautical mile arc across the approaches to Bandar Abbas, extending from Ras Al Had on the Omani coast northeast to Jask on the Iranian coast. Any commercial vessel bound for Iranian ports would have to pass through this arc. The rules of engagement were precise. Vessels would be hailed on Channel 16 at 20 nautical miles. At 10 nautical miles, a boarding team would be dispatched. Vessels refusing to stop would be shadowed by a destroyer. Vessels attempting to run the blockade would be disabled, not sunk. CENTCOM was explicit: 0 casualties if possible. 1 dead Iranian sailor could turn a blockade into a war. March 14th, 4:17, the first contact. The container ship MV Hormuz Star, Panamanian flagged but Iranian owned, was detected by the USS Carney's SPS-67 surface search radar at a range of 32 nautical miles. Speed, 14 knots. Course 045, direct heading for Bandar Abbas. The Carney's tactical action officer, Lieutenant Commander Patricia Osei, initiated the hailing protocol. Channel 16, Standard Maritime English. Motor vessel Hormuz Star. This is United States warship. You are approaching a restricted maritime zone. Reduce speed and prepare to receive a boarding party. Acknowledge. Silence. Second hail at 25 nautical miles. Same message. Same silence. At 18 nautical miles, the Carney launched its MH-60R Seahawk helicopter. The helicopter reached the Hormuz Star in 11 minutes and began circling at 300 feet. The ship's bridge was dark. No crew visible on deck. Lieutenant Commander Osei made the call. She dispatched a VBSS team. Visit, board, search, and seizure. 8 sailors in a rigid-hulled inflatable boat. They reached the Hormuz Star at 5:03. What they found was not what they expected. The ship was carrying 62 standard containers registered as agricultural equipment. When the VBSS team opened the first container, they found tractors, legitimate farm machinery. The second container, irrigation pipes. The third container held 17 crates marked as pump components. Inside those crates were carbon fiber rotor assemblies, 64 of them. Each one precision machined for IR-6 centrifuges. The Hormuz Star was redirected to Fujairah anchorage under escort from the USS Laboon. Time from first contact to boarding completion, 2 hours and 41 minutes. By 9 o'clock on March 14th, 3 more vessels had been intercepted. The bulk carrier Caspian Tide, the tanker Persian Gulf, and a small general cargo vessel called the Kish Island. All 3 were boarded without incident. None carried prohibited materials, but all were redirected per blockade protocol. At 11:30, the situation escalated. 5 commercial vessels approached the blockade perimeter, simultaneously from different bearings. East-southeast, south-south-southwest. They weren't traveling together. Their arrival times converged by coincidence or design. The USS Carney and USS Laboon couldn't board 5 ships at once. The boarding teams were still processing the Caspian Tide. Rear Admiral Whitfield made a decision that would later be questioned in a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. He ordered the Coast Guard cutters Hamilton and James to take primary boarding responsibility for 3 of the 5 vessels, while the destroyers handled the remaining 2. Coast Guard cutters are capable ships. The Legend-class cutters Hamilton and James both displace 4,500 tons and carry 57mm deck guns. But they're not warships. Their crews are trained for law enforcement, not combat. Putting them in the interdiction lead while destroyers provided overwatch was tactically sound, but operationally risky. It worked. By 1600 on March 14th, all 5 vessels had been boarded, searched, and redirected. Total vessels intercepted in the first 12 hours, 9. Prohibited materials found, 1 shipment. Shots fired, 0. Admiral Whitfield's after-action summary to CENTCOM at 1700 was cautiously optimistic. The blockade was holding. Iranian naval forces had not responded. The IRGC had issued statements threatening retaliation, but taken no military action. That assessment was wrong, not because the surface picture was inaccurate. The 9 vessels were indeed intercepted. The boarding operations were indeed clean. The IRGC surface fleet, fast attack craft, frigates, corvettes, had indeed stayed in port. The assessment was wrong because it was looking at the surface, and Iran's real response was underneath it. March 14th, 2 o'clock, 2 hours before the first vessel was intercepted, at the IRGC Navy submarine base in Jask on Iran's southeastern coast, 2 Ghadir-class midget submarines slipped their moorings and headed southeast into the Gulf of Oman. Ghadir-class submarines are small. Displacement, 120 tons surfaced. Length, 29 meters. Crew, 18. They carry 2 533mm torpedo tubes and can lay mines. Their diesel-electric propulsion is quiet. Not as quiet as a modern AIP submarine, but quiet enough in the shallow, acoustically cluttered waters of the Gulf. Their operating depth is limited to around 30 meters. Their range on battery is approximately 200 nautical miles at 5 knots. They're not designed for open ocean warfare. They're designed for exactly what Iran was about to use them for: coastal ambush. The 2 submarines designated by U.S. intelligence as Ghadir-7 and Ghadir-12 headed southeast toward the Gulf of Oman. Their target was not the blockade line. It was something far more vulnerable. 60 nautical miles southeast of the Strait of Hormuz, anchored in the open waters of the Gulf of Oman, sat the U.S. Navy's Combat Logistics Force ship supporting Operation Iron Curtain, the fleet oiler USNS Patuxent, the dry cargo ship USNS Cesar Chavez, and the ammunition ship USNS Medgar Evers, carrying 5,200 tons of ordnance, cruise missiles, naval gun rounds, small arms ammunition, and aviation munitions for the Batan's helicopter squadron. These ships had a single escort, a patrol craft, no submarine detection capability, no torpedo defense systems, no combat systems beyond .50 caliber machine guns. The logistics ships were anchored there because the Gulf of Oman was supposed to be safe. The threat was in the strait. The threat was surface ships and fast attack craft. Nobody at CENTCOM had wargamed a submarine attack on the logistics train. This was the gap in the assessment, and Iran found it. The problem was detection, or rather the lack of it. The blockade force's anti-submarine warfare capability was concentrated in one asset: the USS Batan's HSM-46 helicopter squadron, equipped with MH-60R Seahawks carrying dipping sonar and sonobuoys. But those helicopters were deployed forward, near the blockade line, providing overwatch for the boarding operations. They weren't searching the Gulf of Oman. Nobody was. The Virginia-class submarine assigned to the blockade was positioned inside the strait itself, monitoring Iranian naval traffic in the narrow waterway. It was the wrong place for detecting 2 midget subs heading southeast, and the passive sonar arrays that normally provide wide-area submarine detection in the Gulf. CENTCOM had redeployed them 6 months earlier to the Giuq Gap for a NATO exercise. They hadn't been reinstalled, a logistics oversight, a scheduling conflict between 2 combatant commands. The kind of bureaucratic failure that looks trivial in peacetime and catastrophic in crisis. March 14th, 1422, 12 hours after the Ghadir submarines departed Jask, an MKQ-8 Sea Fire Scout drone conducting routine surveillance over the Gulf of Oman detected a brief radar contact on the surface. Duration, 4 seconds. Classification, unknown. The contact appeared at a position 47 nautical miles southeast of the strait, roughly along the bearing from Jask to the logistics anchorage. The Fire Scout's operator, Aviation Warfare Systems Operator 2nd Class Daniels, logged the contact and flagged it for review. In the volume of data pouring into the Batan's Combat Information Center during active blockade operations, the flag was not reviewed for 3 hours and 17 minutes. When an intelligence analyst finally examined the contact data at 1739, she recognized the signature. A brief radar return consistent with a submarine periscope or snorkel mast breaking the surface. Duration and radar cross-section matched a Ghadir-class profile. The analyst, Lieutenant Junior Grade Kim Park, did something that would later earn her a Navy Commendation Medal. She didn't route the report through normal channels. She walked it directly to Admiral Whitfield's chief of staff, Captain Morrison, and told him they had a submarine problem. Morrison's response was immediate. He ordered a full reorientation of the Baton's ASW assets. 4 MH-60R Seahawks were pulled off blockade overwatch and redeployed to the Gulf of Oman within 40 minutes. The submarine hunt designated Operation Clearwater began at 1830 on March 14th. The search area was enormous, 40,000 square miles of ocean. 2 submarines, each barely larger than a pleasure yacht, running on electric motors in water cluttered with biologics, thermoclines, and commercial shipping noise. The MH-60Rs worked in pairs. Each helicopter carried 25 sonobuoys, both passive and active. They established a sonobuoy barrier across the most likely approach route to the logistics anchorage, a line running northeast to southwest across the Gulf of Oman. For the first 8 hours, they found nothing. At 2:47 on March 15th, passive sonobuoy number 47 Bravo detected a transient, a brief mechanical noise consistent with a submarine battery ventilation fan. Bearing 173. Range indeterminate. The helicopter crews tightened the search. More sonobuoys. Active pinging. The sound travels through water, bounces off metal, returns. Active sonar is loud. It tells the submarine you're looking. But with 40,000 square miles to cover and a logistics fleet sitting unprotected, stealth was no longer the priority. At 04:15, active sonobuoy Charlie 12 returned to hard contact. Designator Goblin 1. Depth 22 meters. Speed 3 knots. Bearing 168 heading northwest, directly toward the logistics anchorage. Goblin 1 was 23 nautical miles from the USNS Medgar Evers, at 3 knots, approximately 7.5 hours from torpedo range. The MH-60R crew dropped a pattern of active sonobuoys around Goblin 1 to maintain tracking. They did not engage. Rules of engagement required positive hostile intent, a torpedo in the water or weapon stores open, before lethal force was authorized. Meanwhile, the second submarine remained undetected. At 6:30 on March 15th, the Virginia-class submarine was repositioned from the Strait to the Gulf of Oman at flank speed. It arrived on station at 09:15 and immediately began a passive search. At 11:04, the Virginia-class detected Goblin 2, and the location sent a shock through the Baton's CIC. Goblin 2 was 900 meters from the USNS Medgar Evers. 900 meters. Well within torpedo range. The submarine had passed through the sonobuoy barrier undetected, likely by hugging the bottom in a shallow channel where active sonar returns were unreliable. 900 meters from 5,200 tons of ammunition. A single torpedo hit on the Medgar Evers would have produced a secondary explosion, measurable on seismographs. The ship would have been destroyed. Every vessel within 2 nautical miles would have suffered damage. Casualties could have numbered in the hundreds. The Virginia-class submarine commander faced a decision with no good options. Goblin 2 was within torpedo range of the ammunition ship. Engaging Goblin 2 with a torpedo risked the same catastrophic explosion. A Mark 48 AD-cap warhead detonating near 5,200 tons of ordnance. Not engaging meant leaving an Iranian submarine in position to strike. He chose a third option. The Virginia-class went active on its bow sonar. Full power. At 900 meters, the acoustic pulse hitting the Ghadir submarine would have been physically painful for its crew. It was the underwater equivalent of turning on a spotlight and a bullhorn simultaneously. The message was unmistakable. We see you. We know exactly where you are. Goblin 2's response was immediate. It turned south and increased speed to maximum, approximately 11 knots on battery. It was running. The Virginia-class shadowed it, pinging every 30 seconds, herding it away from the logistics anchorage. Goblin 1, still being tracked by helicopters 20 miles north, also reversed course. Both submarines headed southeast back toward Jask. They were not fired upon. No torpedoes were launched. The rules of engagement held, but the crisis was far from over. While the submarine hunt consumed CENTCOM's attention for nearly 20 hours, Iran executed its actual countermove, and it had nothing to do with the Strait of Hormuz. March 15th, 800 hours UTC. Red Sea, 90 miles south of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, IRGC-affiliated Houthi forces in Yemen launched a coordinated attack on commercial shipping. 4 anti-ship ballistic missiles, 2 explosive-laden uncrewed surface vessels, 1 underwater drone, all targeting a single convoy of 6 container ships transiting northward toward the Suez Canal. The missiles were College Fars variants, Iranian-designed, Houthi-operated. Speed, Mach 3. Terminal guidance, electro-optical seeker. 2 of the 4 missiles struck the container ship MSC Adriana, a 150,000-ton Panamanian-flagged vessel carrying $340 million in cargo. The ship didn't sink, but the fires burned for 14 hours. 3 crew members died. 21 were injured. The uncrewed surface vessels detonated against the hull of a Saudi-flagged tanker, the Riyadh Star. The damage was below the waterline. The tanker listed 11 degrees before damage control stabilized it. Within hours, Lloyd's of London raised the war risk insurance premium for Red Sea transit by 400%. 3 major shipping companies, Maersk, MSC, and Hapag-Lloyd, suspended all Red Sea transits. Global shipping was rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 12 to 14 days per voyage. Iran's message was delivered without a single IRGC vessel leaving port. You blockade us, we blockade the world. CENTCOM had focused its intelligence collection, its ASW assets, and its command attention on the Persian Gulf. The Red Sea attack was planned weeks in advance, timed to coincide with the blockade, and executed by proxies who couldn't be directly attributed to Tehran in any legally actionable way. The after-action report, classified secret/no-foreign within 6 hours of the Houthi attack, identified what it called a strategic fixation failure. CENTCOM had wargamed an Iranian response in the Strait. It had wargamed fast attack craft swarming the blockade ships. It had wargamed mining operations. It had not wargamed Iran using the blockade as a distraction while it struck the global economy through the back door. Comment blockade if you think the Navy should have anticipated this. Subscribe to Battlefront Signal for the operations that reshape the balance of power. The diplomatic consequences were immediate and severe. China, which imports 67% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea, demanded an emergency UN Security Council session. Beijing's ambassador called the blockade an act of economic warfare against the international community disguised as non-proliferation enforcement. Japan and South Korea, like both U.S. allies, both dependent on Gulf oil, privately urged Washington to lift the blockade. Japan's prime minister called the White House directly. The conversation lasted 47 minutes. It did not go well. The European Union issued a statement expressing grave concern about the disruption to global trade, stopping short of condemning the blockade but notably not endorsing it either. Domestically, the Senate Armed Services Committee announced hearings. The questions were predictable. Why wasn't the Red Sea threat anticipated? Why were logistics ships left unprotected in the Gulf of Oman? How did a midget submarine get within 900 meters of an ammunition ship? Admiral Whitfield was summoned to testify in closed session. The details of his testimony remain classified. The blockade itself continued for 11 more days after the initial 48-hour period. A total of 37 vessels were intercepted. 4 were found carrying prohibited dual-use technology. The rest were carrying legitimate cargo: food, medicine, consumer goods. Images of American sailors searching containers of rice and baby formula made international headlines. On March 26th, the president ordered the blockade modified. Full interdiction was replaced with enhanced maritime inspection, a semantic shift that allowed selective boarding based on intelligence rather than blanket stops. The legal distinction was minimal. The political distinction was everything. Iran's enrichment program at the Sagan facility was not stopped. Satellite imagery from April 2026 shows continued excavation and construction. Whatever centrifuge components the blockade intercepted, Iran had alternative supply routes: overland through Iraq, by air through sympathetic intermediaries. The sea route through Bandar Abbas was only one pipeline, and the U.S. had spent billions to crimp it while leaving the others wide open. The submarine incident produced one lasting change. CENTCOM permanently deployed a dedicated ASW task unit to the Gulf of Oman, 2 P-8A Poseidon aircraft, and a frigate with towed array sonar. The logistics anchorage was relocated to a position closer to the Omani coast, within the coverage of shore-based radar. The gap that Goblin 2 exploited was closed, but the strategic gap remained open. The United States Navy can blockade any port on Earth. It proved that in March 2026. 9 ships intercepted in 48 hours. 0 casualties. Textbook execution at the tactical level. The problem is that blockading a port is a 20th century solution to a 21st century problem. Iran didn't need to break the blockade. It needed to make the blockade cost more than it was worth, and it did that with 4 missiles and 2 drone boats 1,000 miles away. The after-action report's final paragraph has been quoted in every Naval War College lecture since. The operation demonstrated that force projection without information dominance produces tactical success and strategic failure. The adversary was not where we were looking. The adversary was where we were not. 900 meters. That's how close a 120-ton submarine got to an ammunition ship carrying enough ordnance to level a small city. The Sonobuoy barrier didn't catch it. The patrol craft didn't detect it. A Virginia-class submarine repositioned from another sector found it almost by accident. 900 meters between a blockade operation and a catastrophe. The Ghadir submarines are back in Jask. The Saghan facility is still operational. The Red Sea insurance premiums haven't come down. And somewhere in CENTCOM headquarters, planners are wargaming the next scenario. The one where Iran doesn't just send submarines and proxy missiles. The one where it sends both. At the same time. In 3 different theaters. That scenario hasn't happened yet. The 48 hours of March 2026 proved it's not a question of if. It's a question of when.